Some places disappear without a trace. Some encounters leave behind no evidence, just fear. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what you see, but what's watching you. If you are new to this channel and enjoy scary true stories like these, please help this channel grow by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscription helps us bring you more real horror stories that keep you up at night. Thank you for your support. I don't usually tell people about this story because it always sounds a little too crazy to be real, but it is. Every single part of it happened, and I still get a sick feeling in my gut whenever I think back to those few days. This all went down during my sophomore year at a state school in northern Arizona. My school wasn't exactly huge, but it was big enough that you could go a whole semester without seeing the same person twice. That kind of anonymity is part of what made the whole thing feel even more unnerving. At the time, I lived in an off-campus apartment with 3 other roommates. It was a pretty decent place. Nothing fancy, but it was cheap and close to campus. I was the only one in the apartment who didn't have a car, so I walked everywhere, which ended up playing a huge part in how everything unfolded. It all started with a hoodie. About a week before midterms, I noticed this guy who always seemed to be on the same route as me when I walked home from class. He wore a black hoodie, pulled up over his head, no matter how warm it was, and I could never really see his face. At first, I thought maybe he just lived nearby and happened to take the same route, but after 3 or 4 days in a row of seeing him at almost the exact same spots, I started to feel weird about it. The turning point was when I decided to test it. I left class early one day, took a completely different route home, through campus buildings, behind dorms, even cut through the student union. And yet, as I got to the crosswalk by the gas station near my apartment, there he was, standing across the street, facing the other direction. He didn't do anything. He didn't even look at me, but I knew. I remember sprinting the rest of the way home, locking every door behind me, heart racing. I tried telling my roommates about it, but it didn't come out right. I probably sounded paranoid. One of them even joked, "Maybe you've got a secret admirer." I laughed along with them, but something in my gut told me this wasn't some harmless coincidence. 2 nights later, it escalated. It was around 1 a.m., and I was up late working on a paper in the living room. The rest of the apartment was dark and quiet. I had my earbuds in, music low, just trying to get through my research. At one point, I thought I heard something outside, like a scraping noise. I paused the music and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it again. A deliberate, slow dragging sound right outside the window. Our apartment was on the first floor, and the living room window faced the back alley that ran between buildings. I stood up and crept toward the blinds. Heart thudding, I pulled them open just a sliver and froze. There, not more than 5 feet away, was the same guy in the black hoodie. He was standing under the weak glow of the alley light, facing the window, still, silent, and just watching. What made my stomach drop was that he wasn't looking around or walking past. He was standing there like he had been waiting. His hands were in the front pocket of his hoodie. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel him staring right through the glass. I backed away and turned off the light. I didn't call the cops. Maybe I should have, but I just ran to my room, locked the door, and stayed awake all night. The next day, I made a point to change my schedule. I dropped one class, just to avoid walking back the same way. I even bought pepper spray, and started carrying a flashlight at night. I was on edge constantly, checking behind me, always scanning the crowds. For a few days, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself that maybe I'd imagined how bad it was, until I found the note. It was taped to our front door. Just a single piece of notebook paper, folded in half, no envelope, no name. Inside was a short message scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You're not very hard to find, you know. You should really stop walking alone." That was it. No name, no signature, just those 2 sentences. I stared at it for a long time before I brought it inside. I didn't even know how to tell the others. I felt sick, violated. I slept with my door locked and my desk chair wedged against the doorknob. The next morning, one of my roommates noticed something else. Our front door's lock looked scratched up, like someone had tried to jam it. It hadn't been like that the day before. We called the property manager, who brushed it off as weather damage. That was the same day I noticed that my bedroom window screen had been bent outward slightly at the bottom. It was the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I knew then that someone had tried to get in. I finally called campus security and filed a report. They told me they'd patrol the area more often, but that unless I had a name or video footage, there wasn't much they could do. I asked about cameras in the alley, but of course, they weren't working. It all hit the boiling point. The following weekend, my roommates were out of town for a football game, and I had the apartment to myself. I thought about staying somewhere else, but figured I'd just deadbolt the door and be fine. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my bedroom window unlocking, not opening, unlocking. The latch made this distinct clicking sound that I instantly recognized. My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I just laid there, listening. I heard the faintest creak of the window beginning to slide open. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and whispered what was happening. The operator told me to stay on the line. I was whispering under the covers, heart hammering in my chest, praying whoever it was wouldn't make it inside. Then I heard it, a footstep, on the carpet, inside my room. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but I knew someone was in there. I heard slow, deliberate breathing. I stayed still, gripping the phone like a lifeline. Then I heard something that made me want to vomit. A whisper, from the far side of the room. "I told you not to walk alone," I screamed. The rest was chaos. Sirens, flashlights, the police storming the apartment. They didn't find him. Whoever it was, he escaped out the back before they arrived. They found the window wide open, the screen cut clean across the bottom. I moved out 2 days later. The police never caught him. They suspected it was someone who had been watching me for a while, maybe someone I'd passed every day without noticing. To this day, I have no idea who it was. I don't know what he wants or why he fixated on me. But I do know this: that night, in the dark, with only a whisper to confirm I wasn't alone, I came closer to dying than I ever had in my life. And the worst part is, whoever it was, he knew my name. I want to start this by saying, I've never considered myself someone who buys into the paranormal, conspiracies, or even weird urban legends. I'm a realist, or at least I always thought I was, but something happened to me a few years ago that I still don't fully understand. And the worst part is that no one believes me. Not really. I've kept most of this to myself, only ever telling bits and pieces to close friends when I've had too much to drink. But the weight of it has been gnawing at me, and maybe telling the whole story will help somehow. It happened in 2019. I had just left Atlanta and was making a long drive down to Sarasota, Florida, where my cousin was getting married. I had planned to break the trip into 2 days because I didn't want to drive 10 hours straight through. Somewhere around mid-Georgia, I got tired earlier than expected, and I started looking for a cheap place to stay. I wasn't too picky, just a place to sleep, and maybe grab a shower in the morning. I was on Highway 27, south of Columbus, when I passed a faded sign for a roadside inn. It wasn't even lit. The paint was peeling, and one of the letters had completely fallen off, but I could still make out that it said River Pines Motor Lodge. The place sat back off the road, mostly hidden behind a line of tall pine trees. There were no other cars in the lot, which probably should have been a red flag, but I was tired, and it was getting dark. I pulled in, parked near the office, and went inside. There was no one at the front desk, just a small bell, and a sticky note that said, "Ring bell for service." I rang it, and after a long minute, a man came out from the back office. He was older, maybe in his 70s, with paper-thin skin, and a sunken look in his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He barely spoke, just pushed a key across the counter, and gestured to the far end of the motel strip. I asked if the room had Wi-Fi, and he shook his head. No breakfast either. I handed over $40 in cash, and took the key. The room was at the very end, number 19. The parking lot lights didn't reach that far, so I had to use my phone's flashlight to find the door. The room was passable. Bed, chair, bathroom. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper was peeling, and the air conditioner smelled like mildew. But I figured I'd just crash and get out early. I took a quick shower, left the bathroom light on, and lay on the bed scrolling through some downloaded podcasts. That's when I started to notice how quiet it was. Not just normal quiet, but a kind of heavy silence that felt unnatural. I couldn't hear any cars passing by, no bugs outside, not even the hum of the fridge, just the occasional groan from the AC, and my own breathing. Around 11 or so, I finally turned off my phone, and tried to get some sleep. I was drifting when I thought I heard movement, like a shuffling sound just outside the window. I sat up, straining to listen, and there it was again. Not footsteps exactly, just a dragging, almost limping sound moving past the room. I pulled back the curtain slightly, but didn't see anything. The security light down the row of rooms flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing near the office. But then the light went out again, and the figure was gone. I closed the curtain, and tried to convince myself I was just overtired. I locked the deadbolt, propped a chair under the knob, and lay back down. That's when I heard it. A knock, not on the door, but on the wall, the one connected to the next room. It was slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else staying there. I hadn't seen another car when I pulled in. I whispered hello through the wall, even though I didn't really expect an answer. But what I got chilled me. A voice, barely above a whisper, from the other side of the wall. "He's in your room." I jumped up, and turned every light on. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I checked the closet, the bathroom, under the bed. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the room, for what felt like an hour, listening. But there was nothing else. I should have left right then, but I told myself it was probably some idiot messing with me. Maybe the old man let someone else stay in the adjacent room, without logging it. Maybe it was just a drunk or something. I finally sat back down on the edge of the bed, trying to calm myself down, and then I heard it again, from the bathroom. This time, it wasn't a knock, it was a breath, long and slow, like someone exhaling deeply from the dark. I grabbed my bag, and ran out the door, without looking back. I didn't stop running until I got to my car. I looked back at the building, and saw the curtain in room 18, the room next to mine, slowly falling back into place, as if someone had just let it go. I drove back onto the highway, and didn't stop until I reached a Denny's in Albany, almost 2 hours away. I parked, went inside, and sat there drinking bad coffee until the sun came up. I must have looked rough, because the waitress asked me twice if I was okay. I told the local police about it, even gave them the name of the motel, and the key I had pocketed in my rush. The officer who took my report had never heard of River Pines Motor Lodge. He said there wasn't any motel by that name in that area. I insisted. I pulled up the location on my GPS history, but the data was gone, just missing. They humored me, drove out with me to the area. We combed through that entire stretch of highway. I saw the stand of pine trees where the entrance should have been, but there was no sign, no building, no parking lot, just an overgrown lot with rotting fence posts and a rusted-out mailbox. The officer said maybe I had pulled into a different location and misremembered, but I know what I saw. I still have the key. Room 19. The brass is tarnished now, but I keep it locked in a drawer. Sometimes I pull it out and just stare at it, wondering if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the knock on the wall, that voice, "He's in your room," and the curtain falling back into place. Something happened out there, something I'll never fully understand. And if you're ever driving south on Highway 27 and see an old sign for a place called River Pines, don't stop, no matter how tired you are, because if you check in, you might not be the only one in your room. I was 28 when it happened, working late nights at a distribution center just outside of Albuquerque. I'd been doing overnight shifts for almost a year, and although the money was decent, the hours had me constantly exhausted. I usually left around 4:30 a.m. when the roads were dead quiet, and even the early risers were still in bed. That morning started like any other. I clocked out, said goodbye to a couple co-workers, and got in my old sedan. It was mid-February, and even in New Mexico, the temperature dropped low enough at night to frost the windshield. I waited for the heater to kick in, then pulled onto the near-empty highway that took me home. I'd driven that route 100 times. It was a long dark stretch of road flanked by flat desert, and the occasional service station. There were maybe 2 exits between the plant and the town where I lived. That particular morning though, something felt off. Not dangerous, just weird. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was how tired I was, but I had this nagging sense that I wasn't alone. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, far back at first, but closing the distance quickly. It struck me as strange because I hadn't seen anyone get on the road behind me when I left the plant. It wasn't a cop or a truck, just a regular car, maybe a dark SUV. I couldn't make out much detail, but something about the way it was tailing me didn't sit right. I stayed in the right lane and expected them to pass, but they didn't. They just hovered behind me, way too close. At one point, they flashed their high beams once, then again, not like a warning or a friendly nudge to speed up. It felt more like they were trying to get my attention. I sped up a little, not enough to get pulled over if there was a cop nearby, but enough to see if they'd back off. They didn't. In fact, they matched my speed almost perfectly. For the next several minutes, they just stuck there, never trying to overtake, never falling back. I started to get nervous. I took the next exit, a small one with a gas station I'd never stopped at before. I figured if I pulled in and parked under the lights, maybe they'd keep driving, or I could at least get a better look at the vehicle. But the moment I signaled and turned, they did too. I kept my cool, pulled into the station, and parked next to a pump. The SUV rolled past, real slow, but didn't stop. It crept to the edge of the lot, then made a U-turn across the road and parked in the dirt facing the exit, facing me. I'll admit it, I panicked a little. I stayed in my car, hand on my phone, engine still running. I pretended to scroll through something, keeping an eye on the rear view. They didn't move, no one got out. They just sat there, like they were waiting to see what I'd do next. Eventually, I put the car in gear and eased back onto the road, trying to stay calm. The SUV didn't follow right away, but about 30 seconds later, I saw the lights come on again behind me. They were back. I started debating what to do. I couldn't go home. That would lead them straight to my apartment. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't have a plate number and wasn't sure what I'd even report. I just knew I didn't feel safe. There's a long stretch of road between that exit and the next town. About halfway down it, there's an old rest stop, run down, mostly abandoned, except for a couple vending machines and a busted payphone. I'd stopped there once before, months earlier, and remembered there were cameras. I figured if anything went down, maybe it would be caught on tape. I made the turn into the rest stop and pulled into a spot under the one working light in the lot. The SUV didn't turn in right away. Instead, it passed the entrance and drove down the road another 50 feet before pulling into the opposite side of the lot through a side road. They parked way in the back, lights still on. At that point, I made the decision to call the police. I told the dispatcher what was going on, gave them the location, and stayed on the line. While I talked, I could see movement inside the SUV. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He didn't come toward me right away. He just stood there, silhouetted against his headlights. I told the dispatcher someone had exited the vehicle. She advised me to stay in my car and keep the doors locked. Then the man started walking, slowly, across the lot, not rushing, not shouting, just walking, calm and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. He got about 20 feet from my car before stopping. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I remember the way he stood, relaxed, hands at his sides, head slightly tilted. Then he raised one hand and pointed at me, just pointed, no words. It was maybe 10 seconds before the sirens started in the distance. When the man heard them, he turned and walked back to his SUV, got in, drove off without a second glance. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I gave them everything I could. They checked the area, pulled footage from the rest stop camera, and took my statement. But they never found the guy. No plate, no identification, just a dark SUV that had already vanished by the time the first officer showed up. For a while I assumed it was just some psycho messing with me, maybe a would-be carjacker. But the part that still messes with me happened weeks later. I was checking my mail when I noticed an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photo, a blurry shot of me standing at the gas station pump from that night. Not taken from a camera, taken from across the lot, like someone had watched me and snapped the photo themselves. No note, no explanation, just that image. I moved not long after, switched jobs, changed routines, stopped working nights altogether. I never told anyone the full story until now, and I haven't seen the SUV again. But I still get uneasy when a car follows me too closely. I still glance over my shoulder every time I stop for gas at night, because somewhere out there, someone watched me that morning, and for a reason I'll never know, they wanted me to know they were watching.